Bees by Bees presents the John and Paul Christmas Special!
The story of John and Paul and their Christmas songs. Okay, call me crazy, but I think you can boil the difference between John Lennon and Paul McCartney's songwriting down to the differences in their approach to writing Christmas songs. I've been kind of interested this year in Christmas as a cultural phenomenon and how it's affected and been affected by music. And it's fascinating and there's a lot to it, but in this video, I want to talk about how two of the greatest songwriters of all time were inspired by the holiday to create two of the best known Christmas songs of the second half of the 20th century. So let's start at the beginning. John Lennon and Paul McCartney once upon a time were inseparable. They brought the biggest band in the world to life and contributed some of the most inventive and interesting music of all time. I watched the new Beatles 64 documentary recently. You guys know the one, and the main takeaway that I got from it was that the Beatles gave people hope when it felt like all hope was gone after the assassination of JFK.
With a song for Christmas. How about that?
Gary Crimble to you, Gary Crimble to you, Gary Crimble, dear Rudolph, Gary Crimble, me too.
So then, when less than a decade later, the Beatles broke up, leaving a gaping hole in the music industry and in popular culture at large, people were devastated. So it's 1969 and the Beatles are all but over at this point. And John Lennon was becoming more distracted by his social activism, which was largely inspired by his relationship with Yoko Ono. In March that year, John and Yoko were married and went off on their hairpiece, bedpiece honeymoon where they wrote and recorded the song Give Peace a Chance.
1, 2, 3, 4.
When it came to musicians, John and Yoko were at the forefront of the anti-war, anti-establishment movement of the late 60s. Christmas, 1969, they famously funded the use of giant billboard spaces in 12 major cities around the world that said the phrases, "War is over if you want it, Happy Christmas, John and Yoko." Over the next 2 years, a lot happened to John Lennon, and he learned a lot too. The Beatles officially ended. He left the UK with Yoko and moved to America permanently, and he also released a lot of really iconic, stunning music.
As a Beatle, we made it, and there was nothing to do. We had money, we had fame, and there was no joy. And then I met Yoko, and she was making it as an avant-garde artist, and we both tried to find something we had in common. So we decided the thing we had in common was love, and from love came peace. So we decided to work for world peace. We do it by the advertising method. We believe that today's society, advertising is the thing politicians use and commercial companies use. The Beatles use it. John and Yoko should use it. Our product is peace. Oh yeah. Don't want to waste all this film on our face, do we? We specifically did the poster event around the world for Christmas to try and get at least one plug-in for peace on earth at Christmas, because that's what it's about. And happy birthday, Christ, is what it's about.
One of the albums that he released was 1971's Imagine, recognized not only as one of the best albums of the period or of John's career, but of all modern music. The title track was a collaboration with Yoko Ono, and it was a worldwide massive hit with insanely rave reviews. So John looked at it like this. He made a lot of different kinds of music over his career. He'd made pop music, serious rock music, and experimental music, and also heavy, meaningful protest music. With Imagine, he'd learned something that would come to define the rest of his career, stating, "Now I understand what you have to do. Put your political message across with a little honey." So Christmastime came around again, and John Lennon got an idea. He'd write a Christmas song that would echo the sentiments of the billboards that he and Yoko had funded in 1969. He thought Christmas was an excellent tool to be used because it inherently invoked sentimentality in people, but he also wanted it to be a serious song. None of that cheesy stuff that traditional Christmas songs were known for. This song was about making a statement about wanting to change the world. And by making it a Christmas song, John Lennon was able to reach people in a deeper way. The song was released December 1st, 1971, and it became an instant classic. It displayed in the lyrics and the simple melody with the acoustic guitar everything that we love about John Lennon's work, even as a Beatle. He took the opportunity of Christmas to encourage those who celebrated it to think about the real meaning of the holiday and to keep that energy toward everything else all year. Peace, love, and harmony, imperative qualities of both the Christmas season and in John Lennon's vision for the perfect world. 8 years later, in 1979, Paul McCartney and Wings were working on what would be their final album. And for the first time since the band got together, Paul was working on music without the input of anyone else, not Linda, not John, not any member of Wings. He was also in a period of his career where his attention was very focused on his children. His son James had been born 2 years previously, and Christmastime meant toddler fun at the McCartney house. Paul was inspired. He once said that he wrote the song because he liked the idea that Christmas songs only came around one time a year. So with this in mind and his desire to entertain children, he wrote Wonderful Christmastime, inspired by his memories of Christmas parties in Liverpool growing up. He said it took him about 10 minutes.
Now, Wings do a lot of touring. How do you fit in all this touring with bringing up a family?
Cage. We put them on the cage.
Kids,
and
big
off
box
we go.
late at
Keep
night.
the key in the pocket, get home, unlock it.
On this tour, for instance,
Little
where are they
exercise
now?
in the garden.
Where are they now?
They're in Liverpool at the moment.
And this tour goes on nearly until Christmas. What are you going to do? How are you going to spend Christmas?
At home,
In bed.
just quietly like anyone else, you know. But we finish about a week before. Just give us time to do some crazy shopping.
In the studio, Paul did absolutely everything for this song. He played all the instruments, he did all the vocals, and I mean all the vocals. What sounds like a children's choir in the background singing is actually just Paul changing his voice to be higher pitched. This was the first time that he'd ever undertaken such a project. The song was a massive hit that year at Christmas, and would help establish Paul as a solo artist on his own. So, left to his own devices for the first time in his life, with total creativity and every possible technological advance available to him, this is what Paul McCartney created. So, something that I think a lot of people fail to realize about Paul McCartney is that his influences were in fact quite different than John's were. Paul McCartney's parents were musicians themselves, steeped in the traditions of music hall, a type of theatrical, comedic theatre music that was popular in the Victorian period and has remained a prevalent thread in British music to this day. And to be honest, I feel like the influence of music hall and the elements of it that still exist in the music of artists like the Kinks, Slade, The Jam, and even Kate Bush and the Stone Roses is what keeps these artists from being understood and fully accepted by their American audiences. That's another conversation, but I do think that when faced with nostalgia, it was music hall that drew Paul McCartney's attention. This was something that would have been vastly different than John Lennon's influences, with his mother Julia famously being into jazz, blues, and introducing him to rock and roll for the first time. What made the Beatles so successful then was John and Paul's ability to balance each other out. Penny Lane versus Strawberry Fields, Rocky Raccoon versus Revolution. It was their combined differences that made John and Paul such an ideal writing team, and those differences are seen nowhere as clearly than in their Christmas songs.